Good Monday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We begin this morning with the latest developments out of Ukraine. A new round of peace talks in an effort to end the war. This time, representatives from Ukraine and Russia meeting not in person, but through video conference. Russian forces aren't letting up, launching new attacks now in the western part of Ukraine. Yesterday, cruise missiles hit a military base near Lviv, killing at least 35 people. The attack on that base, less than 20 miles from the Polish border, igniting new fears that the attacks could soon spill into neighboring NATO countries.
I feel that something new is in the air. There is no safe place in Ukraine right now because you're in war with a country who has missiles who can fly to any capital in the European Union.
At the same time, Russian troops are also moving closer to the capital of Kyiv. New video shows heavy shelling in a residential suburb just this morning. And as the fighting intensifies, more people are trying to get out of the country. The UN now estimates more than 2.8 million people have fled the violence, most traveling to Poland, where officials warn they're running out of space. This morning, a troubling revelation. U.S. officials say Russia has asked China for military and economic assistance. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is set to meet with his Chinese counterpart in Rome later today. That will likely be a topic of discussion. We have a team standing by to cover all of it this morning. National security expert Jason Beardsley, NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memley. But first, let's go to Ukraine and NBC News correspondent Molly Hunter joining us from Lviv. So, Molly, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is stressing the need for that no-fly zone again, especially after this weekend's airstrike on that military base about 20 miles from the Polish border. This is also about 35 miles from where you are in Lviv. What's the mood there, and has this changed any minds about a potential no-fly zone now that there was this attack really near NATO's doorstep?
Yeah, Joe, Savannah, good morning. I think the people's minds that it's changed are the people who are here in Lviv. So this is the westernmost city we have been reporting from for the last 2 weeks. It is the destination for anyone who is fleeing the violence from the east. It's also the departure point for anyone getting out of the country. Millions of people have moved through, as you just said, more than 2.8 million people have left the country. But a lot of people are actually staying here. IDPs, internally displaced people, are staying here because they think it was safer. Well, we went out yesterday to talk to people about if their risk calculation had changed now that this attack just 20 miles up the road had happened. Why don't you take a listen, to what some people had to say.
I feel two realities. When I read the news and when I speak to some people that are very worried, or some my colleagues from another cities, from Kyiv, for example. Yes, but also we have the part of usual daily life. So that hasn't been changed. Yes, you hear the music, you see some smiling faces and couples which are in love and so on. So Lviv is in the middle of two feelings. So you feel very dramatic situation.
You've got a split screen here in Lviv. Look, families are out walking, and actually there's a big protest happening right over there. There's been music out here. It's sunny. People are enjoying the day, but it's also the war is creeping closer. Now, no one was surprised that military base was attacked. It is the most famous military base in Ukraine. It's used for NATO drills. I think everyone here was just starting to get a lot more nervous on Sunday morning that if they can hit that military base 20 miles up the road, it means absolutely they could hit Lviv. Guys?
That is quite the contrast. So, Molly, earlier this morning, we know Ukraine and Russia held talks via video conference. Do we have any indication yet on how those calls went, if even just the slightest bit of progress was made?
Yeah, and these are happening very regularly, right? We're not getting full readouts necessarily from either side afterwards. We've just seen a tweet, though, from an advisor to President Zelenskyy. He says the parties actively express their specified positions. Communication is being held, yet it's hard. The reason for the discord is two different political systems, he writes. Ukraine is a free dialogue within the society and an obligatory consensus. Russia is an ultimatum suppression of its own society. We have not heard anything about how these talks went, though, from the Russian side. Now, Ukraine has stated very clearly that a ceasefire is a top priority. We know as of this morning, though, Russian forces are not holding their fire on those agreed-upon humanitarian corridors.
And, Molly, let's talk about the eastern city of Mariupol. The Red Cross now warning of a worst-case scenario for the hundreds of thousands still believed to be trapped in the city. No power, no running water. Efforts to get aid to the city have failed. Do we have a sense of just how bad the situation is there right now and what can be done to help?
Yeah, I think it is worse than we could possibly say in words. As you mentioned, no food, no water, no medicine, no heat, no electricity. It's a city of 450,000. We don't know how many people are actually still in there who are essentially being starved out by the Russians. So as of last night, we knew there was a humanitarian convoy heading to Mariupol. As of this morning, we know it is blocked. It has been restarted. You guys, we believe it is still 50 miles outside of the city. I'll send it back to you.
All right, Molly, thank you so much. An award-winning American journalist was among those killed in Ukraine over the weekend.
Yeah, veteran war photographer BRENTANO was shot by Russian forces near Kyiv. He'd been in the region working on a project about the refugee crisis for time. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley has a look back at Renaud's distinguished career.
And in Ukraine, a death in the line of duty. Brent Renaud, an award-winning American video journalist, shot dead by Russian troops outside Kyiv. His colleague Juan was injured in the attack.
We crossed a checkpoint and they started shooting at us. So the driver turned around and they kept shooting. It's two of us. My friend is Brent Renaud, and he's been shot and left behind.
Renaud was a seasoned reporter who specialized in hardship posts, covering Afghanistan to Africa, the Middle East to Mexico.
Imagine being 16 years old, leaving home on your own, $8 in your pocket, and trying to make it all the way from Honduras to the United States, close to 2,000 miles.
With credits from the New York Times, NPR, Rolling Stone, Vice, and HBO, among others. And he won accolades wherever he went.
Thank you. This is a huge honor for us.
The White House reacting to the breaking news.
This is obviously shocking and horrifying.
Renaud, the victim of another day of violence in Irpin outside the Ukrainian capital, where Russian forces continue their relentless push toward Kyiv. They're preparing to go on the offensive against Kyiv, he said. They're trying to scare us. A once prosperous suburb rendered to rubble. And a colleague who died doing what he loved. Matt Bradley, NBC News, Zhytomyr, Ukraine.
Now, this morning, the U.S. government says it has reason to believe Russia asked China for military equipment and other support in its war against Ukraine. That's according to 3 U.S. officials who declined to elaborate on whether the U.S. even knows if the Chinese agreed to that request or not. NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli joins us now from Washington. Mike, good morning. So tell us, how is the White House responding to this? And if China were to get involved, this could seriously change the direction of the war, right?
Absolutely, Savannah. The White House throughout this Ukraine crisis has been keeping a very close eye on China's actions and, just as importantly, their inaction during this entire crisis. You'll remember a month ago when we were talking about that meeting between Vladimir Putin and China's President Xi Jinping in Beijing when Putin went to the opening ceremony of the Olympics. U.S. officials have, over the course of the past month, accused China of tacitly supporting Russia's action by standing on the sidelines. As you say, U.S. officials are not specifying at this stage whether China has acceded to Russia's request for potentially economic or military assistance, but we heard from a National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, on the Sunday shows yesterday, reiterating what he has said throughout this, which is that if China or any other country thinks that they could make up for the economic impact that Russia has faced in the form of sanctions from the U.S., from our allies, they have another thing coming, as he put it to Chuck Todd. Now, Sullivan is in Rome today to meet with a high-ranking Chinese official. This is the highest level engagement between any U.S. and Chinese official in months. It's being called by the White House a long-planned follow-up to a meeting that happened virtually between President Xi and President Biden a few weeks ago. But obviously, this crisis now at the top of the agenda.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Let's now talk about that attack on a Ukraine military base just a few miles from the border with Poland. So those strikes brought this war significantly closer to NATO territory than we've seen yet. What's the reaction to that? Is there renewed concern this goes beyond Ukraine?
Well, President Biden has been very clear on 2 fronts. One, and he repeated this over the weekend, that the U.S. will not be engaged militarily in Ukraine fighting Russia there. As he put it to the House Democrats on Friday, that would be World War III. But the U.S. has also been clear, and we heard this from Vice President Harris, who just returned from the region over the weekend, that the U.S. will defend every inch of NATO territory. And that's why this strike is so significant and so concerning. When we talk about the military assistance that the U.S. has been providing to Ukraine in the form of equipment and also training, this strike happened at the very base where a lot of that training had been taking place. So it is significant. Now, the White House has been, again, resisting calls, even from within their own party, to do more to really try to confront Russia to prevent this from escalating beyond Ukraine's borders. But at this stage, that pressure has not moved them to take steps like a no-fly zone that would be called for and potentially deter Russia from doing so.
And now, Mike, Western intelligence has warned that Russia could be preparing to use chemical or biological weapons. Obviously, that would also change this war quite a bit, especially considering how many civilians are still within the country. How concerned is the White House indicating we should be about a chemical attack in Ukraine?
They're very concerned. You think about the kind of intelligence that the White House was putting out publicly, declassifying in the early days and leading up to this invasion, very specific about what they thought Russia was going to do. And in many cases, Russia did exactly that. Now they're sounding the alarm because the fact that Russia is accusing Ukraine potentially of launching false flag, what U.S. officials would see as a false flag here, chemical weapons attack, leads officials to believe that Russia is considering doing just that. We heard that from Sullivan on the Sunday shows. Let's take a listen.
Part of the reason, Chuck, that we're so concerned that this may happen is that when Russia starts accusing other countries of potentially doing something, it's a good tell that they may be on the cusp of doing it themselves. What we're here to do is to deny them the capacity to have a false flag operation, to blame this on the Ukrainians or on us, to take away their pretext, and to make the world understand that if chemical weapons are used in Ukraine, it is the Russians who will have used them, and the response will, as the president said, be severe.
Now, the White House feels that they've been very successful by calling out Russia's behavior in advance of potentially, preventing them from using this as a false flag operation. The concern, though, at this point is that as Putin's advance on Kyiv and his military offensive has really not provided the kind of results quickly he was hoping for, that he will resort to more extreme measures, and that's why U.S. officials are watching this so closely.
All right, Mike Memoli, thank you so much.
Let's bring in national security expert Jason Beardsley for more on this. He's the National Executive Director of the Association of the U.S. Navy. Jason, good to have you with us. So what is your reaction to our reporting that Russia requested military equipment from China? How could that escalate this situation?
Well, first of all, not much of a surprise. I think, we in the West have known that China and Russia are sort of frenemies, and the fact that they've requested the supplies or support, that's a dangerous escalation. But China has an interest here as well, and they've been watching the United States. They've been watching us in places like Afghanistan. So Xi Jinping is well aware of what he can push, where he can push the limits and where he can't. And right now, we've already made the declaration. I think President Biden has been clear, as your report suggests, that there will be no U.S. military intervention. And Xi Jinping will make the argument that the United States is also doing work to provide material support to Ukraine. And so at the end of the day, this is a pretty dangerous sign that China is probably looking to do support.
We just heard from Mali and Ukraine, Mike, also at the White House about this airstrike near the Polish border. Do you think Putin was trying to send a message with that attack?
This is a very obvious strategic development here. We know that Yavoriv is where NATO supplies come in. There are NATO personnel on the ground at that base. And Putin just signaled earlier in the week that any support for Ukraine would be seen as a war support. And so now he's opening up targeting of that supply line. This is the choke point where from Poland and from the West, all the supplies sort of start here and then move on further into the eastern provinces to supply the Ukrainians. And I think we're going to see more of these strikes in areas like this because he's trying to choke that supply route off. This strategically makes sense for Putin.
Jason, let's talk about another strike in the eastern part of the country. We heard this morning that a pregnant woman and her baby died as a result of that attack on a maternity hospital in Mariupol last week. President Zelenskyy is adamant that NATO must enforce a no-fly zone to prevent more airstrikes like this one. Do you think, is there any scenario where the U.S. and its NATO allies might reconsider that decision in the coming days or the coming weeks?
Well, these things do have a tendency to develop and get even more escalatory as time goes. But again, the White House is reeling from, we've been 20 years at war in Afghanistan and Iraq, U.S. soldiers that have to risk their lives in these places. Before we do that, the United States, the White House would have to make a very clear case as to what the objectives would be, what the limits would be. They have not done that yet, but they've done the opposite, which is say we're not getting involved. No one's painted for the American people, the constituents, the voters, why Ukraine is a must-secure location. And until that gets done and the American people sense that we need to be in there, I think the White House is in the right place here by suggesting that we do not allow the calls for the no-fly zone just to suck in American troops to another conflict, the third in 20 years that would put us in some very, very jeopardized positions on a flank that is very vulnerable for us.
All right, Jason, as always, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right.
More than 2.8 million Ukrainians have now left their country, most of them headed to Poland, where some cities are warning their resources are maxed out. Over the weekend, the mayors of Warsaw, the capital city, and Poland's second largest city, Krakow, said they're struggling to accommodate Ukrainians once they cross the border. And now they're urging the UN and the European Union to intervene. NBC News senior national correspondent Jay Gray joins us now along the border of Poland and Ukraine. Jay, good morning. Good to have you with us. So what is the feeling along the border right now? You've been there for quite some time, but now there's been this Russian airstrike just miles from Poland. Does anything feel different?
Yeah, it's changed the dynamic, Savannah. I can tell you that there are those here now who have been watching this unfold and understand that the violence has come very close. I mean, less than 20 miles from where we're standing right now. I want to give you a look at Przemyśl Station. This train station is one of the busiest right now, just about 2 miles from the actual border crossing. And listen, you talked about more people coming into Poland than anywhere else. Well, most of them come through this station, and so it remains full. We see people coming across in waves. Now, I think we're seeing fewer and fewer refugees making the trip right now, the end of the first wave, if you will, and there are a couple of reasons why. I think, first of all, you've got all those people who left early that wanted to get out as quickly as they could and really made the trip. Then things broke down in the eastern part of Ukraine. You couldn't make your way through. The humanitarian corridors didn't last, and the fighting pinned a lot of people in, and so you've got them working to get here, and it just takes a bit longer. Now, though, when we've seen this attack to the west, the furthest west we've seen since the war began, you may see some of those who felt comfortable, felt safe in Lviv and other areas start to move in as well. So the idea here is we're going to see a lot more people in the coming days and weeks. It's come in two waves, and this is the second, and many believe the wave that will bring many more people than the first. And it's disheartening for a lot of those we talk to here to know that they can't stay in Krakow or Warsaw because they don't want to get too far away from the border. You understand that. I mean, many of them have left a family member behind who is fighting, so they want to be able to get in if they can, if they're allowed. And they also feel like they may lose some information the further away they get. So it's a real back and forth here, and very difficult for tens of thousands of families still making this trip.
Absolutely. Jay, you mentioned these cities that they're at right now. Well, they're starting to warn that they're running out of space, as I mentioned, to accommodate refugees, running out of supplies. Where are people going right now once they enter Poland? You mentioned they want to stay nearby. Yeah. Is it just into these sort of shelters right there? What are their other options if they have to move further and maybe somewhere, at least for the time being, more permanent?
Yeah, not many options. A lot of the shelters are just 2- and 3-day shelters where people can come in, get a rest, stock up on supplies that they desperately need, and kind of figure out where they're going to go. A lot of the small towns and villages near the border are completely full at this point. As you talked about earlier, Krakow and Warsaw really at the brink of where they can accept these refugees. I know yesterday at Warsaw Station, they added 17 new outbound trains, 9 of those going to Berlin, and the other 8 going to the Czech Republic. So they're trying to disperse. They're asking for help from other members of the EU. But take a look. I mean, you can see it right now. It is just continues to bring people in, people who don't know where they're going to go, how they're going to get there. And you're right. Many of them don't want to get too far away, but the places that are close by, the places where they could stay, are filling up. And that's where this crisis is going to reach its peak.
And Jay, I have to ask you about just a heartbreaking statistic from UNICEF. They say at least half of Ukrainian refugees are children, some of them forced to travel on their own. What have you seen over the past few days when it comes to child refugees? Are you seeing some of these children who are alone? And then what does that mean volunteers are doing for them?
Yeah, look, I haven't seen any that have come in alone that I know of. I see most with families. But I have been told stories about those who have come alone, some with a phone number attached to their jacket, some with a phone number written on their hand saying, call once my child makes it safe. You think about the desperation in those parents' lives when they said, I've got to save my child, but I can't leave this fight, and so they've sent them across the border. And what's happening with not only those children who make the trip alone, but a lot of these orphans who are refugees, is they are quickly moved into an area where they can establish with a foster family. They find a place to live, and they're reindoctrinated into some type of normal life, schooling for some of them, but just a quiet place to rest and sleep. And so that's top of mind for a lot of those running these types of operations.
Absolutely. Just heartbreaking to hear. Jay Gray, thank you so much once again.
Welcome back. We'll have the latest out of Ukraine in a few moments, including more on that deadly attack on a military base and the detailed work being done to dig through video on social media to get a more complete picture of what happened. It's all ahead, but first, let's take a look at other stories making news this morning.
Now, let's start with the Chicago public school system. It's one of several districts set to drop its mask mandate today, exactly 2 weeks after the mayor removed the mask and proof of vaccination requirements for indoor spaces. Chicago Public School CEO Pedro Martinez said this about the decision. CPS was one of the first to require universal masking in schools, and we would not be moving to a mask optional model unless the data and our public health experts indicated that it is safe for our school communities. Now, the district is still encouraging students to continue wearing masks in the classroom, but some parents and teachers are still worried it's too soon to drop the mandate. NBC News correspondent Shaq Brewster joins us now from Chicago with more on how teachers and parents are reacting to this new mask policy. Shaq, good morning. So what are the big concerns teachers have about dropping this mask mandate? Are they worried about vaccination rates among students at all? What are they telling you?
Yeah, you hear a lot of talk about those vaccination rates, and there's some conflicting or at least competing information that you hear out there. Chicago Public Schools, in announcing this decision, they make the point that when you look at 5 to 11-year-olds, the vaccination rate among that group is above the national average. That number about 47% district-wide. They also point out that about 91% of all members of the staff are fully vaccinated. But the teachers union comes back and says that that's not even across the city, that there are nearly 50 schools with vaccination rates at about 10%. And it's because of that that you have many of them saying they have some issues. Listen here.
Not happy about it because I know in the school community that I'm in, the rate is just 18% for vaccination. So I'm concerned. In my classroom, I only have 2 students that are fully vaccinated. It's a big concern because, as we know, the vaccination does not stop you from getting COVID. It stops you from going into the hospital and stops you from dying. But I can contract COVID, take it home to my mom, who has a very fragile immune system.
One concern that you continue to hear is that they believe that masks have been working, that they have been keeping teachers and students safe in the classroom, and they think it's a little bit too soon to get rid of that requirement.
And I understand teachers are sort of confused about the timing also because some feel it violates the agreement that was made by the teachers union last year. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we're talking about an agreement that was made about a year ago. I was in front of this exact school when the dispute between the teachers union and the city of Chicago over when there would be that return to in-person instruction. And in part of that agreement that the two sides came to, it came with things like air purifiers, like social distancing in the classroom, and then that mask requirement that was on paper in writing. And some teachers feel that with this new rule lifting that requirement, it's now breaking that agreement. Listen to this point that a teacher makes.
My first thought was, why now? We're seeing cases decline for sure, but there are still lots of cases going around. Do I think CPS has made it incredibly difficult for everybody? Yes. I don't understand why teachers or families have been put in this position. So I'm sending my child to school with a mask.
One point that she made a little bit after that is that she will be wearing a mask. She's going to have her child wear a mask when she goes to school. But again, it's now optional, and now you'll have the prospect of some kids in the classroom having that mask on and some not.
And Shat, quickly, before I let you go, what about parents? What are they saying? I know it's been quite split. Some parents are ready for their kids to learn without a mask. Others might not be. What are you hearing?
Exactly. You can't ignore that there is some political pressure, that there's been a lot of pressure from some parents to have that mask mandate be removed. And that is that's the accusation that you hear out there, that there's leaders in the school that are responding to that pressure. I think, as you mentioned, you have that split. I spoke to a parent last night who said that she's going to have her daughter wear a mask when she goes to school. She said both of her daughters are very serious about having that mask on, but she said she didn't like that the masks were required. She's fine with other students in the classroom, in her daughter's classroom, not having that mask on. She believed that it should be a decision up to the parent and not up to the school district. So you have that divide that you're seeing not just here in Chicago, but across the country, Savannah.
All right, Shaquille Brewster, thank you so much.
Let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel for more on the latest COVID headlines. So, Dr. Patel, we're seeing these mask mandates drop. Well, several countries around the world are fighting the latest variant to emerge, nicknamed by some as Deltacron. Appears to be a hybrid strain of the Delta and Omicron variants. How concerned are you about this, and how much should we be preparing for even the possibility of another wave?
We should definitely prepare for the possibility of another wave, but not from Deltacron, which you're right, Joe, is the Delta variant and features of the Omicron variant in one, likely in someone who is infected with both, but it is extremely rare. And the growth rates of the very few individuals who have been infected in the UK, the US, and other parts of the world have not been growing anywhere near what we see with Omicron. So we should worry about another surge, not soon, but prepare for it, but not from Deltacron.
I want to ask you about the World Health Organization saying it's concerned the war in Ukraine could make COVID worse in Europe. We've seen images of refugees traveling, Ukrainians hiding in small places with little circulation. How easy is it for COVID to spread in these situations? Is there anything that can be done in this very difficult situation to try and limit the spread?
Yeah, it's an incredible kind of testament to how much officials on the ground, medical, professional, public health are trying to vaccinate people. Of course, that won't take effect immediately, but also just simple things, Joe, like passing out masks and also these treatments. That can be a game changer. Having these oral antiviral treatments in the form of pills, you have to get them to people when they're infected, but that is actually what the World Health Organization has purchased in bulk, and other countries. Keep in mind, this isn't just limited to the Ukraine, which has a low vaccination rate, but many parts of Europe are under-vaccinated, and that is why we're seeing not just in that kind of Ukraine-Russia region, but all throughout Europe. And it's something that we need to keep an eye on because, as you know, we tend to follow Europe in trend in rising in cases.
Yeah, they're always a bit of a crystal ball for us. Speaking of vaccines, the Pfizer CEO says a fourth vaccine shot could be necessary. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
It is necessary a fourth boost right now. The protection that you are getting from the third, it is good enough. Actually quite good for hospitalizations and deaths. It's not that good against infections, but doesn't last very long. But we are just submitting those data to the FDA, and then we will see what the experts also will say.
Very quickly, is this what you were expecting?
It was. It's a matter of time. When and how and what will we need for a fourth booster, and how similar will it be to the other shots we had, and what's the timing that we need to do from here on out? 6 months out, 12 months, but yes, expect a shot coming.
All right, Dr. Kavita Patel, as always, thanks so much for joining us on this Monday morning.
Now, violence against the Asian American and Pacific Island community has skyrocketed since the pandemic began. According to the group Stop AAPI Hate, there have been almost 11,000 hate incidents against the AAPI community.
That represents a 339% increase in 2021 from the year before. 3 New Jersey high school students say the violence comes in part from a broader lack of awareness about the community, so they decided to do something about it. NBC News Now anchor Joshua Johnson has more.
All 3 of us were friends since elementary, middle school.
Russell, Eric, and Ishan grew up together in Livingston, New Jersey.
I love working with them, especially since we do believe in the idea of Asian American studies in our curriculum.
Now, as high school seniors, they've been rallying for the state to require Asian American and Pacific Islander history classes.
After the Atlanta shootings back in March of 2021, we still see so many attacks against AAPI individuals happening. I mean, Michelle Go was attacked on the train, and then Christina Yuna Lee was stabbed in her apartment. I felt that the main factor that contributed to these hate crimes and attacks was the lack of understanding of the AAPI community, whether it's through their culture or their history.
Asian Americans weren't really set into the curriculum, and we had to do our own research if we wanted to learn more about that.
Asian Americans at times are not seen oftentimes as Americans themselves.
Back in January, New Jersey's Governor Phil Murphy approved a curriculum mandate
for the inclusion of knowledge about the various contributions that Asian Americans have made to America.
The beauty of something like this bill being passed and a mandate is it does put it on the forefront and begins to actually mobilize resources to actually help assist educators in getting the materials together that they can actually use in the classroom.
New Jersey is the second state to specifically require AAPI history in schools. Illinois was the first, and other states are considering similar bills.
It's about the fact that multiculturalism and talking about race and ensuring that our students and our young people have opportunities to honor and talk about their history is recognized in schools.
And over time, these proposals might help major cities reduce an ongoing spike in anti-Asian hate crimes.
I definitely have concerns with safety. We were going to go to a trip to New York City, but after learning about what happened with her, it definitely made us fear about going to New York City.
That's just how much it affected our personal lives.
And I think that the root of these problems is just people simply just not being educated on them.
I think the better word to use is awareness. No one's really born with the intention of, I'm going to carry a hate crime and be uneducated. I think it's just the fact that there is this lack of content in the institution.
The best thing about this bill is that it's quite hopeful. The fact that so many people were able to rally around this issue. History is a story.
History is awareness.
History is acceptance.
That was NBC News Now anchor Joshua Johnson bringing us that story. Let's get a check on your morning news now weather.
Bill Cairns joins us now. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Hey, great Monday morning to you guys. And this weekend, it felt like winter in a lot of places. And this is a picture of last year's beautiful cherry blossoms on the tidal basin. But this is how they looked this weekend. Unfortunately, the snow came in. D.C. picked up about an inch of snow. There was an icy, crusty coating on a lot of the cherry blossoms, and didn't quite leave it as beautiful as sometimes as you would see it. So as far as the forecast goes, we're getting ready for the peak blooms. That should be about March 23rd to the 25th. Typically, the average is like April 1st. The earliest ever was March 15th. Latest was over April 18th. So a little early, but we're about 9 to 10 days away from that peak bloom forecast. As far as the freeze goes, it is very cold in the southeast. 14 million people impacted by these freeze warnings. As the sun gets up a little higher, it's quickly going to warm up, but it's a cold morning. Look at Atlanta at 30 degrees. Thankfully, there's not a lot of wind, so the wind chill's not all that bad, although 22 in Richmond probably doesn't feel great. But as I said, later this afternoon, the March sun is going to go to work. Temperatures will jump up. This morning in Norfolk and Richmond, it feels like 20s. It'll feel like 60 this afternoon. So everybody gets a nice little warm up, even into the Northeast. So a lot of areas that had that snow on Saturday and Saturday night will be melting, including northern New England. And look at that. We even get into the 60s from Philly to New York, Hartford to Boston as we go throughout your Tuesday. Tuesday, and towards the middle of the week, things get really warm. Cincinnati hits the 70s. Richmond gets up to 75 on Friday. New York City approaches the mid-60s by Friday. So there is a silver lining to our cold and snowy weekend, and travel across the country looks pretty good during the day today. So I hope that was the last big snow, cold event of the season. I'm ready to move on, guys, and I think a lot of people are with me on this one.
Yeah, and I think
I'm majority. I feel confident.
Our necks are sore from the whiplash, too, so hopefully that's the case, Bill. All right.
Yes.
Thanks so much. As the war in Ukraine continues to unfold, many Ukrainians are fleeing their homes, and in one case, the journey had tragic consequences. NBC's Janice Mackey-Frayer joins us now from Beijing with the latest on this. With more global reaction to the war, Janice, good morning.
Good morning, Joe and Savannah. We start with some tragic news from northeastern Italy, where a busload of Ukrainian refugees overturned early yesterday, killing one young mother and injuring 5 other people. Emergency crews used cranes to lift the bus off the slope. The cause of the crash is under investigation. They had driven from Ukraine and were heading for the Adriatic coast. Officials say more than 35,000 Ukrainian refugees have flowed into Italy since the beginning of the crisis, and they will be getting health care, schooling, as well as work permits. Tens of thousands of people rallied across Europe to protest against Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. There were a lot of flags and banners calling for peace and solidarity. And within Russia, there were vigils as well against the war, even though freedom of speech has been impacted there. Monitoring groups say that more than 5,000 people have been detained in Russia for questioning Putin's war. And finally, the UK is starting to lay out a new scheme for a UK refugee program where it will match displaced Ukrainian families with UK hosts. And the government will give what they call a financial thank you of £350 a month. That's about $450. Right now, they're working on getting the website set up so they can have UK volunteers signed up. The UNHCR says that more than 2.5 million Ukrainians have fled their country since late February. They're scattering across Europe. Most of them are in Poland. It is a staggering number, they say, and of course, we know it is a growing crisis. And that's a look at your headlines this morning.
All right, Janice, thank you so much.
All right, and we now want to do another deep dive, peeling back the curtain on how our social news gathering team is verifying videos coming out of Ukraine. Of course, we had this big news out of the west of the country, that Russian military strike on a military base called the International Center for Peacekeeping and Security. It's less than 20 miles from the Polish border, of course, NATO territory. Now, at least 35 people were killed in that attack, according to officials in nearby Lviv. And as it gets more dangerous for our own NBC News cameras to be there, we're learning more, we're leaning more on video coming out on social media to show us what's going on in this war. So here's a video from the aftermath of this attack. It was tweeted out on Sunday, March 13th. You can see it right here. And it claims to show the damage from the attack. And now whoever took this video can actually be heard saying, quote, "Here is your Russian world, boys." Now, this one was verified by our teammate, Matteo Maschella. So how does he know that this video shows what it claims to show? I'm going to show you how he did it. First of all, here I'm just going to show you, this is a still from that video you just saw. So, of course, you can see these yellow buildings, right? Well, Matteo was able to use Google Maps, the same Google Maps that you have at home, to locate the International Center for Peacekeeping and Security. You see this here, and match it right here, that same yellow building, to this one that was in the video. Now here we're seeing it just using Google Maps Street View. Now, Matteo also ran what's called a reverse Google image search. This is a really important tool to make sure that this video from this weekend wasn't something that was being reused from the past. Now, that's basically where you can Google a picture, just like you would Google search terms. He's going to make sure it doesn't pop up dated earlier than this weekend from a different event. Also, I mentioned how dangerous it's getting for journalists in Ukraine. So I want to warn viewers, there is some graphic video coming up. So this also came across social media this weekend. It's of journalist Juan Arredondo getting injuries treated in a Kyiv hospital. Now, this one was verified by our teammate Rima Abdelkader. So how do we know this is actually a journalist covering the war in Ukraine right now? Well, here's a picture of Juan Arredondo, the journalist that was just in those videos. It's showing him as a visiting journalism professor at Arizona State University. You could see that's by ASU. And we can back that up. Look at this. With proof from ASU's website. This is ASU's website, Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. And there we go. There's his name saying that there he is as this visiting professor. We also have this Instagram post from Juan himself showing some of his coverage on the ground in Ukraine. Now, in that video, Arredondo is talking about his friend Brent Renaud, someone we just spoke about a little bit earlier on the show, a former New York Times journalist who was killed while working in Irpin this weekend. Now, although a Times press badge was found on Renaud, the publication said he was not on assignment for them at the time that he was killed. But here we can see that that just contributes a little bit more information to exactly who he was and what happened. Now, all this showing just how important it is that we can verify this video. When we're relying on social media to get you that information, we want to make sure that everybody's actually seeing what they think we're seeing so the world can continue to see what's going on during Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Right. Thank you, Savannah. Now, no matter your age, it's hard to make sense of what's actually happening in Ukraine. That's especially true for teens. MSNBC 11th Hour anchor Stephanie Rule sat down with a group of high school students to get their perspective on a war that is half a world away.
I see a lot of it on social media. People are constantly reposting it on stuff like Instagram and platforms like that. And I think that's where most of my knowledge of this comes from.
I do get probably most of my information from TikTok. And I know that most of it's not always reliable. So most of the time I do try to watch the news and use other sources to like corroborate it and make sure that what I'm learning is really the true information.
Does it feel like it's affecting us or impacting your life, or is it more something that's of interest to you because you care about global politics?
We don't see the direct repercussions exactly, especially as teenagers in America and New Jersey more specifically, but definitely when you're scrolling through TikTok and you see these firsthand accounts of these kids just our age who are dealing with this, I mean, we're all complaining about like our tests next week and they're wondering, then they're hiding in a bomb shelter.
Mabel, do you feel like what's happening in Ukraine has any impact on your life?
On my life, like in the immediate now, it doesn't really affect me. I, of course, am like nervous about what's happening in Ukraine for the people, the families that are being torn apart, and also just if this is going to escalate into something larger.
Do you want the U.S. military to get involved when you look at these videos?
I wish that we could help and use the power that we have to help people. But at the same time, I understand that would only make it worse for everyone. I mean, if the U.S. gets involved, then probably many European countries would follow. And not only are we in some danger and the rest of Europe is in danger, but the war in Ukraine escalates and everybody there is in more danger.
Does this make you feel scared?
I feel scared for other people. I feel scared for what could happen to the world. I don't feel scared for my own safety.
Do you have an opinion of Vladimir Putin?
I think this is more of a him versus Ukraine. I don't think this is a Russia versus Ukraine, which is one way to kind of view him.
I feel like we shouldn't be blaming Russia as a whole because this is like Putin. It's all what he's doing. There's a lot of people in Russia that are protesting peacefully and trying to speak up about this because a lot of this is being caused by Putin's control and how he's taking control of the media and the government, all of that.
We have the benefit of living in a democracy. Watching an authoritarian leader rise like that with so much power, does it scare you, even if it's on the other side of the world?
It's definitely scary seeing somebody, especially in a country so powerful, taking so much control.
I guess that what we're thinking is like, could that happen here in a sense? Like eventually, could it escalate to a point where like people here are inspired by like actions that are happening in these other nations and it leads to something more in our own nation?
People are going to be angry pretty soon about gas prices, right? The economic sanctions we have placed on Russia are going to result in worsening inflation, gas costing more. Do you think that's okay?
I feel people do have a right to feel a little upset, but at the same time, I think it's also good to take into consideration how this is impacting the rest of the world, because to my knowledge, this increase in prices is a result of taking away from using Russian oil, which is then cornering Russia and making them not as strong and stuff.
The thing is that we need to remember we are, in a sense, saving the world. And I don't want to say that in like a propaganda-ish way. I mean, we're deterring Russia from what they're doing and basically telling them it's wrong with the means we can without starting a World War III.
Are you angry at all? In your teen years, you have experienced January 6th, a pandemic, and now a war breaking out in Europe.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say we're angry, but we're upset. I can't
Daniel's
speak for all of us. Daniel might be angry, but I am definitely upset. I'm not angry at anybody specifically, maybe Russia, but...
Does it ever feel like it's too much?
It's definitely a lot. I don't think it's anything easy to go through in any sense, but I think it's important for all of us to care a lot about it and want to learn more, and I think that's the most important thing out of all of this.
It is good to worry sometimes because it shows that you are staying active in these issues and you are staying educated for your own sake so that you know what's happening in the world. I feel that if you are worried, it shows that you care, which is something that we all need to have.
Russia's role in the International Space Station hangs in the balance as the country refuses to sell rocket engines to the U.S. It's yet another consequence of the ongoing fallout from Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, a key player in all this, the director of Russia's space program, took to Twitter to suggest that if the U.S. were to block Russian cooperation in the International Space Station, it could have dire consequences for the spacecraft itself. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard has more.
Russia's deadly war on land is now impacting international efforts far beyond, in space.
It'll degrade their aerospace industry, including their space program.
Pointed words from President Biden announcing sanctions on Russia after the first days of the invasion. Now Russia symbolically removing other countries' flags from its rockets, including the United States. Russia's space director in a tweet saying the rockets were now, quote, more beautiful, prompting former NASA astronaut Scott Kelly to respond, without those flags and the foreign exchange they bring in, your space program won't be worth a damn. Maybe you can find a job at McDonald's if McDonald's still exists in Russia.
The space program has always risen above, geopolitical issues here on the ground, if you will. And this really puts a huge impact and hampers the international relations on the space station. So it's very concerning.
The structural ramifications of this wedge, consequential. In retaliation, Russia says it will no longer supply the U.S. with the RD-180, a major engine used in several American rockets. Russia's space director saying on Russian state TV, quote, let them fly on something else, their broomsticks.
How does Russia's refusal to supply additional engines for these rockets impact U.S. efforts?
There's several companies all throughout the country that are developing new engines and new launch vehicles. I think we're going to be fine. And I think it's going to hurt Russia then far more than it'll hurt the United States.
The European Space Agency is also distancing itself, saying it is, quote, very unlikely it will go forward with a joint mission this year to launch and land a robot on Mars. Russia even suggesting they'd allow the International Space Station to crash. Their space director tweeting, who will save the ISS from an uncontrolled deorbit and fall into the United States or Europe?
I think that relationship may be changed forever. I'm not sure that it could ever go back to what it was.
The International Space Station, though, currently occupied by 7 astronauts, including 4 Americans and 2 Russians.
How tied together are each nation's efforts in space?
So for the space station, it's highly coordinated. We're talking about a facility the size of a football field that is in orbit, and that takes a lot of energy and highly coordinated efforts.
That was Vaughn Hilliard reporting. And now NASA tells NBC News in a statement, NASA continues working with all our international partners, including the State Space Corporation, Roscosmos, for the ongoing safe operations of the International Space Station. The new export control measures will continue to allow U.S.-Russia civil space cooperation. No changes are planned to the agency's support for ongoing in-orbit and ground station operations.
The war is upending lives all throughout Ukraine. That includes animals and the people who love them.
Yeah, right now, a frantic effort is underway to evacuate Ukrainian animal shelters and get those animals out of danger and hopefully into loving homes abroad.
Yeah, we want to bring in Katya Kurilets, she's the co-founder and director of Transforma Street Dog, a nonprofit on the ground in and around Kyiv that's trying to rescue these animals. Katya, good to have you with us. I mean, with the war raging on, countless Ukrainians trying to get to safety themselves. I know some people have asked the question, why focus on evacuating dogs and pets, not people? How do you answer that one?
Well, hi. We are trying to rescue animals from war zones as much as possible. It's very difficult, and sometimes we need to offer very big money to someone who can, who at least has a car and could possibly pick up an animal from the war zone.
Yeah, so we've seen these incredible pictures of Ukrainians who have taken their pets with them as they flee their homes. We've seen their pets with them in these bomb shelters. But evacuating a shelter with dozens of animals, with a lot of dogs in there, I imagine that's a lot more complicated. How do you do that? Tell us about the process.
Since the war began, hopefully our organization got a very big support from European organizations, from everybody who knew the situation. And we started to get such support as donations. Some people offered us transportation, and also foreign countries offered us places in their shelters for animals from here. And we organized transporting our animals to the borders of Romania and Poland. Of course, we needed lots of resources to make it possible, including even crates and nets for these crates. But we already rescued about maybe 70 dogs, and we're going to rescue more. And also we are going to evacuate cats also. And this is a very difficult process. I have to organize everything.
All right, Katya.
And
very quickly, what can people do to help you out?
Yeah.
If somebody wants to help, they can donate on our website, transformastreetdog.com, or be in contact with us. We constantly offering dogs for adoptions anyway, because maybe some dogs will not go to foreign shelter, but immediately to some family.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah. Katya, thank you so much. So transformastreetdog.com. We appreciate what you're doing and your time this morning.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.